ModCons is all about showcasing modern conservatism, and what better way than speaking to the future of the party? For our new series, Candidates Cornered, I will be speaking with Conservative parliamentary candidates, starting with our general election 2024 intake. Today, I'm joined by Caroline Newton. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You stood in the 2024 general election as a candidate for Henley and Thame. How did it
That's
go?
right. It was a new seat, formally. So it had a new name. It was a slightly redrawn boundary, but it was largely the same as the former Henley seat, which had been solidly Conservative for well over 100 years. And we lost it in the same way that so many of the so-called blue wall seats were lost this time. Henley was one of those. So we lost it quite clearly by over 6,000 votes, and we were the second highest. Lib Dems won it, and Reform came third. And quite reassuringly, it wasn't Reform that lost it for us. It was they didn't make up the difference. Excuse me, between us and the Lib Dems, but we lost it by over 6,000 votes, which is a significant turnaround.
Yeah, because it was a lot. It did have quite a big majority before, I guess.
Yeah, about 14,000, though, given that we had lost a few seats, we'd lost a few voters with the boundary review. That's not strictly accurate, but yes, we had a very clear majority before.
So Henley obviously is a notoriously plum Tory seat, Conservative since 1885, except for a brief stint under the Liberals for 4 years. It's also the former seat of Michael Heseltine and Boris Johnson. What did it feel like to actually win that selection?
Oh gosh, it was such an honor, frankly, because it's my home seat. I was born and brought up here. I've brought up my children here. I've lived here most of my life. So there was no other seat that I wanted to stand for. And I suppose all my eggs were in this one basket. And it was a real honor to have been selected by the people that I have campaigned with over the years and sat on councils with and knocked on doors with, to have been selected by them. So it was an incredibly exciting day, though I never felt that it was a safe seat. And frankly, John Howell, who had the seat before me, never felt that it was a safe seat either. He always, every election that came up, he fought hard. I never thought that it was a safe seat, and as the campaign progressed, it felt less and less safe and secure.
I remember speaking with you afterwards, and you said you kind of had a feeling that it was going to go that way. Oxfordshire definitely had a pretty tough time of it, with a Conservative wipeout and the Lib Dems taking every seat except Labour in Banbury. What do you think the reason for this was? Some say that it was flood management, water quality. Do you think that was the reason it happened?
Yes, and also worth saying, of course, Oxford City always very strongly Labour as well. So Labour have two seats here, but the rest are, as you say, Lib Dem. Um, Undoubtedly, in Henley and Thame, I can't speak for the other seats. It wasn't so much flooding, I don't think, as water quality. It became a huge issue. And you will know maybe about the Henley Royal Regatta, which is a very is a rowing regatta that we're very proud of in this area and is, internationally famous. The election happened on the Thursday of the Henley Regatta, so water quality was really in people's minds. The river was really in people's minds. There was a very strong narrative about Oars people getting sick from the river, that just gathered apace, and it was incredibly good news management on the part of the Lib Dems to be focusing on that issue right the way through the campaign, and I think actually really helped shift that issue as a really salient one in the election. But it was not, so that was locally really important. I'm not sure whether, I don't think that alone lost us the election. It was very much national issues that lost the election for us, which I'm sure you don't need me to talk you through. But I've knocking on doors just at the weekend, actually, people who say that they just couldn't bring themselves to vote Conservative. So they, having been lifelong Conservatives, they didn't vote. Or people who said that it was D-Day what did it for them, so there were various things that happened through the course of the campaign that made them just either stay at home or vote in a different way. So it was a series of things, but yeah, for sure, water quality is one of those, and something that we as Conservatives have to have a clear response to. And the frustrating thing about water quality was that one of the reasons we know about water quality is because the Conservatives passed the legislation which ensured that that every single sewage plant in the country now has to record its and report its figures. And that is as obviously as a precursor then to dealing with the issue. But there was no way that we could make that case. That people were not ready to hear that. And the story of privatization being the problem was much too loud for us to be heard against.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think I did hear a lot before the election or in the election campaign, that the only reason we knew how bad like the flooding situation was because of us. But I think our problem was that we didn't have a kind of next step, as in what we had done to do about it that was kind of being communicated, as well as just saying, okay, it's because of us, it's being recorded. But it was kind of like, and then what?
Exactly. And we had a very strong Green candidate whose vote didn't nearly support how good she was as a candidate, who was very outspoken on water quality, and the Lib Dems really benefited from her work, frankly. And I never quite got to the bottom of her claim that less money had been spent on the water industry by the water industry since privatization than was spent in the previous years when it was all nationalized. I never actually got really clear figures on that, so I couldn't rebut any of that. Though you couldn't get any purchase on the fact that it was under the Labour government that Thames Water was taken private and was effectively was frankly raided by private equity. You couldn't get any purchase on the fact that it was a Liberal Democrat water minister during the coalition period who had actually undermined some of the protections for water quality. None of that was going to cut through. There was nobody had ears open to hear any of that.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think people had just stopped listening to us at
Yeah,
that point. But
exactly.
there was a point where, I think we were the Green Party, especially, under David Cameron when you voted blue to go green. Do you think that our supporters, do still vote blue to go green?
Well, I joined the party when Cameron was leader, and one of the things that attracted me was his environmental credentials. So that to me is really important. I live in a small, as you've seen, I live in a small village. I'm surrounded by farmland and countryside. I have represented divisions and wards in this area, which are very rural and who are very worried about excess building, for example, and really care about the nature that they're surrounded by. So it is really important to me. Do people join the Conservative Party to go green? No, no, I don't think that we would any longer be that party. Though I have to say, Boris Johnson's premiership was, and frankly, Theresa May's as well, were beacons for the environmentalism. I think that I'm worried about people who are anti-environmental. I understand the concerns about the costs associated with net zero, and I know that that is a real concern for people. I know that particularly in this area, people that don't have the option of anything other than oil central heating because it's a rural area, and there's a stock of old houses, as there is anywhere in the country, which will be really expensive to retrofit. So when we were faced with oil and gas boilers being banned in very soon, that was actually really concerning to people because it's simply not practicable in many houses to retrofit to electric heating. So I think we have to, to my mind, we absolutely have to have answers to the issues relating to the environment. I mean, just today we've had the most extraordinary storms in Oxfordshire, which I don't think you'd have necessarily seen in previous years. There is no question in my mind that it's a real problem that we have to deal with. But we also have to think how we're going to do it in a way that people can afford and it doesn't, doesn't break their banks. And my worry about what Ed Miliband is doing as the Secretary of State for Net Zero, Energy Security and Net Zero is that he is accelerating the pace of reform so fast that it is neither achievable nor affordable. And we've got to find a way of making those two things possible.
I've visited your very lovely home in Henley, and when you hosted the first CRF rural policy session. And so I can confirm that you truly are a champion of the countryside. What are your thoughts on agricultural property relief, the inheritance tax, and what do you think that the Labour Party kind of fails to understand about rural culture?
Oh my gosh. Well, let's start on the last one first, which is, you know, I think you can encapsulate how little they understand it by the fact that they have a Secretary of State who is, who was leader of Lambeth Council. I have no problem with Lambeth Council, but it couldn't be more central, central city than that, and represents an urban seat. I genuinely don't think that he understands really intrinsically the issues relating to the countryside. And I think that the fact that the Prime Minister appointed him in that role demonstrates that he doesn't understand it and he doesn't care about it either. And he's not making any pretense about that. And the inheritance tax on farms just serves to underline that. All the farmers I know here are so concerned about it, and it genuinely will destroy their family businesses. And what I think Labour doesn't understand is that farmers and farms are just central to our communities. The farm here that surrounds my home, the farmer digs people out of snowdrifts. People slither off the hill during icy weather. He's the one who gets his tractor out to pull them out of the ditches. He bought the local pub because it was going to close and nobody was going to buy it. So he's created a farm shop so that we can get really great quality food from right on our doorstep. All of these things which aren't just window dressing, they are absolutely fundamental to our communities and our culture out here in the countryside. And I think we have to preserve that and promote it and protect it. And there is a broader issue, isn't there, of food security. And we know, having gone through periods of shortages of fresh vegetables and fruit, we know that actually you can't take that for granted. And I think one thing that we learned from COVID was that we actually really want to become more self-sufficient as a country in our food production, and destroying the farms isn't going to do that. It's not, of course, just the farms that are going to be affected by this. I was speaking to a business owner yesterday who his family has owned a business for over 100 years. They are also going to be suffering from the changes in inheritance tax. And he thinks that it probably won't survive the next generation.
That's the problem. And I think you raise a really good point about COVID. And it's so strange, the timing of this Labour IHT increase. It's bizarre because during COVID, everyone was of the mind that we needed to make sure our food security was stronger. Everyone wanted to shop local. They wanted to help their community, local businesses. And so in reaction to that, Labour kind of think, okay, let's crush all the farmers, let's increase tax on businesses. It doesn't make sense and it doesn't add up. It feels like they weren't here for the entirety of the pandemic and they've just landed on our shores and just started making things up.
So one thing, I'm not sure whether you're aware that in 2022, I think it was, maybe I can't remember, the Lib Dem Green Labour coalition that ran the county council then, they've fallen out a bit now, decided to go vegan at county council. Now, laying aside the fact that it's really questionable why county councillors were getting free meals from the council, the fact is that what was extraordinary in a farming county like this, where over 80% of the county is rural, they decided that they were going to prioritize lentils, mangoes, um, chickpeas from across the Atlantic. They were going to prioritize that rather than deciding to promote really good quality products, produce created right here in the county. And we ran a campaign to try and prevent that, to try and point out that actually what you should be doing is saying, okay, let's have all that low quality food that is produced overseas using methods of husbandry that we wouldn't accept here, using the kind of fertilizers and pesticides that we would not allow here. So let's stop importing that. Let's reduce our consumption of that. Let's focus on really healthy diets using local food, and then supplementing that where necessary with with pulses and beans. Fantastic. But the idea that they just didn't get it, and this is the Lib Dems who claim to represent rural areas, and the Greens and Labour, and I think that is just really was a kind of just was just a forerunner to this decision now to clobber the farmers. It's just a complete lack of understanding and comprehension of the fabric of areas like this.
Absolutely. So moving on, so
Mm.
you have an incredible story yourself. You studied history at Cambridge before becoming a diplomat in Eastern Europe. How did you venture into diplomacy, and what is it like? I presume no 2 days are the same.
How did I end up in diplomacy? Well, I did quite a lot of my history degree was quite modern history. Well, then it was modern history, now less modern, now very much history. I did quite a lot of African history, post-independence African, so a lot of 1970 history coming into the 1980s. And I graduated in 1989, so that was, quite modern history at the time. And I suppose that was a very natural thing to continue that interest into my career at a time when a lot of my friends were going into management consultancy or accountancy, and I didn't. That was not a route for me. I knew that, and so incredibly fortunately, I found myself in diplomacy, and it was a really interesting time because of, as I say, I graduated in 1989, so it was all the post-communist period, which you wouldn't remember. Post-communist, exactly, post-communist era. It was 10 years after the Falklands War, more or less. I had, and my roles, one of my early roles was working on the South Atlantic and Antarctic team department. So a lot about, so still the Falklands was a very, very salient issue. Our relationship with Argentina, still somewhat tense. And I was posted in Poland on a diplomatic posting in the mid 1990s. So really saw a country overcoming its recent past. And it was fascinating. Both of those roles were really fascinating for understanding the fragility of democracy, the critical importance of us supporting it, being prepared to fight to support it if necessary, the importance of symbols in and signals in diplomacy and international relations. And whilst clearly I chose a diplomatic route, my father and my stepfather were both servicemen, and I think it's the lessons that I learned then and my past family history really support the need now for us to be taking our security really seriously, and talk softly and carry a big stick. So I absolutely would always go the diplomatic route, but to do that, the things I learned in the Foreign Office as a diplomat was you have to be really alert and serious about your security as a country. And so that I think that's probably my greatest takeaway from diplomacy.
And in terms of, carrying a big stick, and
Mm.
obviously we're seeing Trump doing that. Uh, for us, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we need to ramp up defense spending?
We absolutely need to ramp up defense spending. I mean, for whatever you think about Trump, one thing he's absolutely spot on about is that it is completely unjust that the American taxpayer has been paying for our defense since the end of the Second World War, and that we have been happily We've been happily enclosed in the warm blanket of American spending. We have to look after ourselves. And I think that one thing I think about one of many things that will change now that Trump is president, I think is going to be an acknowledgement of that. And I think that's going to have potentially a really big impact on government spending and on the balance of where we choose to put our government, our government finance. But yeah, we have to spend more money. We have to be really serious about it. I mean, when you think about the pitiful amounts that we spend on our defence, and we know that that it isn't that we have to be ready to fight for the things that we value.
Absolutely. I think I always go back to the welfare bill when I think about priorities and budgets and the fact that we definitely need to reduce one and increase the other.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean, what's the first rule of government? The first role of government? It's define your borders and then protect them. That's the essence of government, isn't it? And then once you've got your borders protected and once you've got security and stability, then let's talk. But nothing is possible unless that is true.
that's it, totally. And I think we can all have the nicest life, but it can be thrown upside down in a second if we're not protecting ourselves and our borders. So I totally agree. So you had a fantastic, incredible start to your career, and then you decided I want to do something even more different. So you then went on to the BBC to produce shows such as the Today programme and the 10 o'clock news. Such a shift from your former career. What made you want to move into the media?
Well, listen, actually, not such a shift if you consider that it's all kind of current affairs and it's all about understanding the world and telling a story about the world, and it's just a slightly different story and with a slightly different audience, I suppose. But what? So I'm trying to think why I left the Foreign Office. It was partly because I knew that I didn't want to have that peripatetic lifestyle. I knew I didn't want to have to travel overseas potentially with a family to continue my career. And I did a pros and cons list. What is it I like? What is it I don't like? What am I good at? What am I not good at? And somehow ended up thinking journalism. And so yes, I was very fortunate to get a job as a researcher on the Today programme. So went right back down to the kind of the bottom of the pile again, but in an incredible programme. And was at the BBC for 7 years in a series of different jobs, as you say, the Today programme, 10 o'clock news. And I worked at Westminster, which I think is where I first started thinking politics rather than policy. So actually started thinking, actually, that's where I would like to be heading.
I think it's great that you career changed and weren't scared to start from the bottom. But I think there are a lot of people who stay in a job or in a career because they're so nervous to have to kind of go back to basics and kind of be at the bottom rung of the ladder. So yeah,
Yeah.
very admirable.
Well, yes, I guess, yes, I was fortunate that I could do that. I didn't have a family at that point,
Yeah.
so I could afford to do it. And then I've done it at other times in my career as well. And it's like I remember a friend of mine set up a company once, and I said, "Well, what a very brave thing to do." And he said, "No, no. Once you've actually decided to jump, then you just have to fly. It's the deciding to jump is the tricky thing." So yeah, I think I absolutely hope that for my own children, that when they're going through their careers, that they take a chance and that they follow dreams and recognize when a wave has passed and then they need to leap onto another one.
I think that's it. It's all about, having the confidence and the bravery to just go for it. So after the BBC, you then headed up the government's broadcast comms at number 10 under Boris Johnson. An incredible time in British political history. What did that role involve, especially at a time when arguably the media were really kind of going for the PM?
Keeping your finger in the dike, I think probably is what that consisted of. So I joined there in March 2022. And at the time, that was a period after Partygate when there'd been already a lot of resignations. And this was kind of felt like the last roll of the dice for Boris. And I was invited to join by Gitto Harry, who I had worked with as well when at the Greater London Authority when Boris was mayor there. And he asked me to come and join them. I didn't hesitate. I mean, as a historian, as a politician, as a conservative, it was the most extraordinary privilege to be there. Though notwithstanding, I had, I was there really to support Gitto, to support the British government, really, because it was at a time when Russia had just recently invaded Ukraine. We didn't know where this was heading. With my background in Poland, I felt very passionate about and very concerned about the potential ramifications of that. And it felt to me that if I could do something to help stabilize, that would be that I wanted to do that. So, but if I'm honest, I didn't, there were 2 years left of Boris's mandate. I questioned whether he would be there in 2 weeks, frankly. I thought he might see through two months, but I didn't see that he could stay for another 2 years because the whole narrative had shifted so firmly away from him, and there was so much criticism of him, both from within the party and from the media, and it was such a strong body it was such a strong wave. But what that consisted of was really try how do you tell the story of what this government is trying to do through broadcast, which is through sound, also through pictures, quite distinct from how you tell a story in words, as in the press, and trying to reestablish relations with the broadcasters, which frankly were poor. One thing that troubled me was the sense that there was a sense that you had to have a minister on the round every day. So that's to say, all the main broadcast outlets in the morning, you needed to put a Secretary of State up to take a battering on any number of subjects, but probably not their area of expertise. That troubled me, and I would have, had we stayed longer, I would have wanted to look at what benefit it does any government to effectively use 3 hours of a Secretary of State's morning answering the same questions repeatedly, with journalists hoping that they're just going to get a little sliver of daylight in there. So had we been there longer, then I would have wanted to have a bit of look at that. But actually, it was just about being thoughtful and inventive about how do we get our best spokespeople out with journalists, showing the nation what it is that we're actually trying to do, and trying to cut through all that mess and the noise that was flooding at us.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think you're totally right there. Like, I know Rishi, when he kind of came in, he kind of withdrew all the ministers for a little while and was just like, you're not getting a media round because it's not helpful. And it's basically just like sending a lamb out to slaughter every morning.
Yeah, exactly. And whilst there is definitely an argument that if you're not there, somebody else will be there, and somebody else will be making the running. It just felt that it rarely actually paid off.
So the Conservative Party now has a very challenge. Well, not very. The Conservative Party now has a challenging 4 years ahead, but there is a lot to be positive about. What gives you hope?
It's the people that I campaign with every weekend. There are such good people in the Conservative Party who have such clear a clear sense of purpose, and a perspective, and who have struggled many of them over the last few years, but who so strongly believe, as do I, in conservative philosophies and ideals, and that I know that with them, and we have a really great association out here in Henley and Thame, very active, and I know that we will rebuild, and we will be heard, and we will be able to, I think, regain people's trust.
Absolutely. I feel that optimism. And I always go back to conference this year when we all got back together after we'd lost, our most historic defeat ever. And all the media were like, they're all really upbeat. I don't understand why they're all so happy. But I think it's because
Yeah.
we believe in our party and we believe in what it stands for. So going on to that,
Yeah.
why, Caro, are you a conservative?
Listen, I was probably a conservative, I drank in conservatism with my mother's milk, probably. So she was a member of the Conservative Party. I have absolutely no idea how my father voted. He never, ever would say, but um, I'm sure that that must have had an influence on me. But effectively, so the reason I'm in politics is because I want to make life better for as many people as I can, and to make people, happy, healthy, and prosperous. Hopefully that's why the majority of us are in politics. I don't think it's why everybody is, but certainly my driver. And I believe that it's conservatism that does that best, that has the answers, that is practical and realistic, and really and understands more about the heart, understands about the heart of the society that we're trying to represent. And clearly there are different forms of conservatism. And that's one of the tensions in the party, and also one of the strengths. This massive coalition that we represent, and the kind of conservatism that I espouse and celebrate are, I think, probably is very much like the other people who vote conservative and support conservatism in this part of the world, which is to say, celebrating who we are and where we come from, um, celebrating the evolution of that. Stability and security. We've talked about that, the importance that we place on yeah, on, well, for me, defense and security, rule of law, the the a flourishing private sector, which has to underpin everything, and that means that we also therefore celebrate and promote self-reliance, working hard and being rewarded for that. And that is why we believe that we also need to have a low tax base and as small a state as we possibly can, whilst recognizing that we have to support people who cannot support themselves. And that's why I struggle with Labour and the Lib Dems, particularly, because they think that greater government involvement is the answer. And frankly, the Labour is more honest about that than not. Not so much this year in the election. Sorry, last year in the election, the Lib Dems seem to feel no compunction whatsoever, to be honest, about the give and take, and they seem to have never seen a problem that spending more money on it wouldn't help. So that's why. So I'm a conservative because I believe that we have to support the private sector, that we have to be really realistic about the pistons that run our economy, and that we need to make the most of, to really be able to support this country, to educate our children, to drive prosperity.
Thanks so much, Caroline. I think you're spot on there. And I think since the budget, the Conservative Party, business owners, businesses, I think we're back on the same side again. And I think we realise that our values are actually the shared values. And Labour did sell the country a dream.
Yeah, but I think that over the last 5 years, I think many of us conservatives have, we struggled with the instability that seemed to be celebrated by some in government, and the revolution, frankly, that was being celebrated and pursued by some in government. And I don't think this is a country. I suspect there aren't many countries which really flourish in a revolutionary situation, and this is definitely not one of them. And I think that's why we probably lost the support of a lot of people last year in the election as well, because all those things that we think about ourselves, that I've just enumerated, like security, like stability, like gentle evolution, um, just were not being promoted seemingly by our leaders.
So everything going as it should, you attain your rightful place on the green benches. What policy area would you like to change, or what would you like to achieve as a parliamentarian?
Oh gosh. So well, as a parliamentarian, I'd want to be a really good local MP. But I also think, and that would be the priority, being responsive, really knowing an area as well as I do, and being able to promote the interests of an area. In this area, that is rural issues, particularly environmental issues, issues relating to the river, cleanliness of the river. And I really, as a mother, really care about helping our children thrive and looking after children who are in care, who have special educational needs. I think that is absolutely fundamental that we focus on the next generation. But my background in foreign affairs, of course, means that I would be really fascinated to be involved in that. And I think that we need people who have perspective and who recognize the importance of celebrating what we share rather than what divides us. And that goes for both within this country, but also internationally, and the alliances that we have with those who share our values. So I think those would be the areas that I would really want to focus on. And if I'm fortunate enough to get the chance.
Amazing. So future foreign minister here.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but let's start small.
Well, Carrie, thank you so, so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Real pleasure meeting you again and having a chat. Thank you so much for asking me along.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.